So my favorite quote, I have it on the wall, is from George Adair that says, everything you've ever wanted lives on the other side of fear. I'm a big believer. So as we just talk about fear of the unknown, fear of AI, I just think when you're in a place that makes you uncomfortable, that zone of discomfort, like that's actually where the magic happens. Growth and opportunity, I think, comes when you step into that place. So I'd encourage your listeners to step into their own zone of discomfort. Like it's truly brought some magical things to my life.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Victoria Pelletier, who talks about breaking through our armor that's holding us back, even though it created our success.
Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com.
You've done everything right. You've worked harder than everyone around you. You've built the discipline, the drive, the resilience. And somewhere along the way, you built something else. Armor. A version of yourself that could handle anything, push through anything, never flinch. But what if that armor, the thing that got you here, is the very thing keeping you from what comes next? Today's conversation reminded me of my own tracks. We talk about what it really costs to lead from behind a mask, why vulnerability is not a weakness but a strategic advantage, and how one woman went from being called the Iron Maiden to becoming the CEO Whisperer. My guest today is Victoria Pelletier. Let's meet her and see how she did it. Welcome to Richer Soul, Victoria Pelletier. It's great to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
My family had very little of it. So that is what drove me to make some. So my story, born to a drug-addicted teenage mother who was very abusive to me. I'm fortunate I was adopted out of that environment to loving parents, but lower socioeconomically. So my mom, and my mom's the woman that raised me, told me at 10, 11, she said, Tori, you need to do better than us. And she meant, vocationally. My mom was a secretary, my dad a janitor. So I started working at 11 to have extra things. There still wasn't enough to do many family vacations, to go on my school field trips, but that's where the early drive was, to never have to worry about having money.
It's funny because sometimes I see two paths. One is what you experience, which is the drive to have money. And the other is the resignation to say, I'll never have money, and to blame other people. And those people never end up on the podcast. So I only get one side of the equation, but I know that there are two sides to it, because you can hear it in society from people who don't make that switch. And it's funny how sometimes these harder experiences in childhood actually are the ones that drive us to success.
It's a big part of my why, right? And so people need to understand, why am I so driven? Where does the motivation come from? In the face of a significant amount of trauma and adversity over my life, not just in the early years. That's a big part of it. So I think you have choice. I sign a lot of my social media posts with 2 hashtags, one of which is no excuses. My children don't love that I say that, but you have a choice in how you're going to respond to things. And my choice was to do better than biology or circumstance.
Do you know what drove that? Like, what made you take that choice versus giving up or just blaming someone else or making excuses?
I think there's a little innately in my DNA that fight or flight. I'm a fighter. I am competitive. I want to win, and so I think that's naturally there. But then there was the nurture part of it as well, and being supported and being told I was better than where I came from, because I had a lot of self-doubt, at the hands of my biological mother. And so my adoptive mom was great. And so that nurturing of, who I was and that I was better than that. And just to stand tall consistently and go after my dreams. So that's the nurture part versus the nature competitiveness inside me.
And I'm guessing school didn't teach you anything about money.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. Sadly, no, nothing. I mean, learning trigonometry. I don't know. I saw some meme the other day. They're like, well, that helps me at tax season. So.
Your adopted parents teach you much about money or not at all either?
No, actually, it's so interesting. So my parents declared bankruptcy twice and they were not very good. They didn't have a lot of it, but they spent more than the little they had as well. And so, no, they were not good. I didn't learn anything from them. All of my habits came, from me. Like I said, I started work at 11, which child labor laws, I'm sure, would not allow that today. My first leadership role came at 14. So I just learned, if I wanted something, I was going to save for it. I bought my first house at 19. So I was just driven to not get in that position.
You had a lot of early success and a lot of early leadership as well. I'm assuming most of that came from the driving force that we've been talking about.
Yes. One, I enjoyed it, but two, in my head, my definition of success as a child and young person is different than it is today, but it was very much defined by hierarchy, status, wealth that came along with the roles. But I also really enjoyed it. So my goal was to be a lawyer. I jokingly say, I think my mom had me watch too much of the TV series LA Law as a child. And so I was determined I was going to be a lawyer. But when I was in university, you need an undergraduate degree first. And so I ended up working in a bank in their contact center. It was flexible to allow me to go to school. I was also acting part-time. And I rose through the ranks extremely quickly. And I loved leadership. I loved the business side of things. And so what I thought was 1 year off before law school just kept getting put off. And then I never went. And I excelled through the business world. But yeah, my definition of success, as I said, was being in a different vocation than my parents were in and accelerating to higher levels, making more money, having more responsibility. Again, the definitions change now, but I can say the definitions change while having achieved certain level of success by that prior definition.
Did the bank teach you about money?
Yes and no. So I'm a voracious learner. And so I took every course available to me. And so I was in their contact center, started in selling credit card insurance, and then moved to the retail side of the bank. Then I moved to the discount brokerage. I had my securities license. And so I learned a lot about money and how to manage other people's money and give advice. But the stuff that I think most people need, even just around basic budgeting, that's not really something that, the bank taught, other than in the context of give us your money and we'll help you make more money through investment.
And that's what it comes down to. It's funny how even the financial, I asked you because it's a financial position and people go to their banker or to their investment person expecting money advice. And yet most of those professions aren't taught it if they don't have it. So you get out, you have success, you become known as the Iron Maiden. And so part of that, though, was you created armor, right? I'm assuming all that early stuff from childhood created massive armor that allowed you to push through whatever you needed to push through. And it probably created success. So how did that go?
Yeah. Yes. The Iron Maiden nickname I learned I had in my mid to late 20s. So I became, Rocky, a chief operating officer at age 24. So I got recruited out of banking operations at age 24 to become the COO and general manager of outsourcing contact center. So I had some of the skills, but not all. It was a stretch role for me. And when I stepped into that executive role, I was the only woman. I was the youngest by around 2 decades. And so I felt like the only, and my experience with leadership was predominantly command and control. And I thought as a young female executive stepping into this stretch role, I needed to wear a suit of armor, wear a mask, in which case I'm not going to demonstrate vulnerability. I'm certainly not talking about my backstory, where I've come from. I'm not going to show emotion because I want to be seen as all business all the time. And I don't want anyone to question why I have my seat at the table. And so that's why I got the nickname Iron Maiden. Yet when I first was told it, I've always been very comfortable making tough business decisions. I'm also a very tough negotiator. So I wasn't initially upset by it. I thought it was because I was doing what I was tasked to do in business and make these tough decisions. And I'm seeing, strong business performance. But I actually realized in a subsequent conversation with a colleague, it's because they thought I was devoid of emotion. I was all business all the time. So I had to sort of remove that mask, the armor, start to demonstrate that, I'm a real person here who has emotion. Like I've always cried, the Humane Society commercials. And so I just never let that be seen. And so I had to pivot and work hard to change that Iron Maiden moniker to something different.
While it got you success, do you think it also prevented you from getting more success?
Yeah, I do. I think I had extreme success in business, but I think my relationships with others, and particularly my own team, were not as strong as they could have been. Although there's some leadership traits that are in me and I've always been focused on, such as, diversity and inclusion, bad word, I notice it, or phrase to be talking about in today's day and age, but things like that were always there. But being much more empathetic and creating this, I'll say, psychological safety for teams, I could have been so much more successful if I'd learned that earlier on. I had people who followed me because I gave direction, but would they have followed me into the proverbial fire? No. And so the success I've subsequently had as a result of the pivot is incredible, but I could have had it much earlier.
It's funny. You got put into leadership positions. They probably didn't teach you how to be a leader, though, did they?
Not at all. None.
No. And I think that's true for most of corporate America. Most places, they just assume you'll figure it out. No one has these conversations to make it easier for all of us at a young age to be able to know that.
Yeah, I think most businesses I'll say, it's not necessarily a mistake, but it can be, but they promote their top performer into leadership. But that doesn't mean they're going to make the best coach or leader. And so again, not necessarily a mistake. Where it does become is when they don't, to your point, like they don't give you the tools to be successful. They don't give you the coaching and the education on how to be a good leader.
Until you mess up, then they bring you in the office. They go, I think you need a coach. We'll see if we can fix this. See if we can fix those rough edges. But it's not the best way of doing it. That's all.
Yeah.
A couple times you said you had a different definition of success until you changed it. And our tagline is always, you got rich, now what? It's like, you got success, now what? But part of it is also realizing that what drove us isn't what got us there. What kind of aha did you have?
I realized, particularly if we're going to talk about wealth and status, I had it, but that wasn't what made me happy. And it wasn't what inspired me at work. So the shift for me came actually a lot to do with leadership and inspiring and developing other leaders behind me. Being the kind of leader that I hoped people would look up to and be inspired to be like. I've had some good leaders in my career, but I never had one that I would declare as my mentor. I had many that were the opposite of that I looked at them and I'm like, I'm going to be nothing like this. So that's how, the definition shifted for me. But I also, and personally, so my ex unfortunately passed away from cancer almost 13 years ago, but had it the first time when I was pregnant with our youngest. And so recognizing, your health is your wealth. I have a friend who tells me all the time, so that to, I remember my mom saying, money doesn't buy happiness, but it makes one hell of a down payment. Ha ha. But then,
It
but
does.
then, but at the same time, having it like it wasn't as meaningful. So, I think a lot about, I coach people even around personal branding, and a big part of, I talk about multiple elements, but think about legacy. Like, what do you want people to say about you when you die? And so that's how I shifted also around success. Successful for me when it comes to legacy is people talking about, did I leave the workplace, the community, and the world at large better place when I left it than when I came in? Did I raise two really good human beings? What did I do, to help and support others? So that's where the shift in terms of what success, looks like. Now, don't get me wrong, Rocky. Doesn't mean I'm not driving hard to make money and like do well, but I don't define myself by that.
So, how do you find harmony with that? How do you drive and yet want to make the impact and not want to be the Iron Maiden? Like, how does that fit together for you?
I'm very, very values driven and about doing the right thing. A big part of my motto and my mantra. And when people will think about who I am proud to say a lot of people will talk about my brand as being, very much around this, again, values based. I am trusted by many. I am highly authentic, radical candor from a place of care and compassion, not being a jerk. And someone said to me recently, do you want to be right or do you want to be rich? And for me, when you ask that question, you can be both. I'm not trading off. I'm not going to sit in silence over something because I believe it's right and I'm ethically or values driven to do something. Because if I sit, I could make money. So for me, it's not mutually exclusive. I choose to do both.
Do you find there's a lot of areas in life where we're told that you can't have these two things and yet you can?
I work with C-suite leaders all the time who, think that, and I see them they're focused on one thing and one thing only around sort of financial results at the expense of their employees and sometimes their clients or customers. Again, I think if you bring that together, when you think about like, how do you lead strategically, like there is not a trade-off, but so many I find operate in that fashion, or they're focused on the quarter to quarter results, again, to the detriment of those that actually can help drive longer term, short-term trade-offs consistently. I'm not saying you don't sometimes do that, consistently to drive mid to long-term benefit.
I think that's one of the biggest problems with American business is the short-term thinking. Nobody is building for the long-term game. And we unfortunately have perverse incentives that force that. And you don't end up with long-term durability unless you're lucky in those types of things. And I think those that will drive for that do have the long-term success. But again, it comes down to incentives and how people are compensated or what they're incentivized for. And if you pick the wrong incentives, you will get what you asked for. And I don't think we always understand what the unintended consequences are.
I agree. In some of the work that I do with leaders, I'm often reminding them like incentives drive behavior. So if you want a different outcome, you need to measure and manage and incent on a broader set of metrics. Again, we are driven, we have shareholders or, that we need to serve. Financial performance, got it. But there's other things. If you talk about a certain culture, having vision, mission, values on the wall mean nothing if you are not like holding people accountable to the language, the actions, and the behaviors that align to those vision and values. And the exceptions you make are what people are watching.
They are. I learned that, kids don't listen to what you say, they listen to what you do. And I'm sure the same thing happens to employees at work. The behaviors are crystal clear and they may not say it so much, but that definitely happens. So was there like an aha moment? How did you go from that Iron Maiden type of person to the CEO whisperer and go through that shift?
It was a very conscious shift. And now perception is reality. So I know that I'm not underneath it all. I'm not truly an Iron Maiden. As I said, I cry at the drop of a hat. My husband jokes that I cry almost always at like when we go out for dinner, but that's because phone down, we're having conversation. I am a softie. A good friend of mine gave me the nickname as Turtle, tough, exterior, I'm extremely resilient, but soft and marshmallowy on the inside. I needed to operate with strategic intentionality to show up very differently. And it was uncomfortable for me to start to, talk about and be vulnerable about things and not dive immediately into, the business agenda all of the time. And so I had to, like I said, be strategic and intentional. And so that it took several years before it then just became innate or natural. But I've always known I would coach my teams on people do business with people they like and they trust. And so how do you build, a real authentic relationship? How do you come from a place of like, how am I going to make you successful as we're engaging with them and selling to them? And so it was doing more of that for myself. So building those kinds of relationships, I've built an incredibly strong followership in terms of teams. And then when it comes to clients, in the world of professional services and consulting in particular, sadly, too many consultants tell their clients what their clients want to hear, not what they need to hear. I'm a truth teller. And so I've built trust with CEOs or other senior leaders, one, through commitment to a real relationship with them, not just the sale on the table, and telling them the things, holding up the mirror that they need to hear and see, and then working with them on how we're going to tackle that together. And so that's how a few years ago, one of my colleagues named me the CEO Whisperer after doing this multiple times in the setting that we worked in.
I'm not surprised, but I was surprised at how many coaches won't tell the truth, or just people in general. And the reason I'm surprised is because I just assume if someone's paying me to help them, that is my role. And they should take it for what it's worth. You can listen or not listen. I agree with that. I might have come to those conclusions for all the wrong reasons. But if I came to them, someone else must have too, right? And yet people won't share that. And to me, that's just shocking. I don't know why that is. But we do. I mean, we're crystal clear. We use it in our marketing language. We will tell you the truth, even if you fire us, because otherwise, what's the purpose of doing this?
Right.
Comes back to culture and to fit. You mentioned earlier on self-doubt. How long did it take for you to kind of overcome that? Or does it still show up?
I'm sure there's still little bits of it that show up at times, but I saw it both in my personal relationships and certainly how I showed up at work into my 30s. The awareness around it came much earlier, but showing up differently and starting to believe. I'm not a fan of fake it till you make it, except when it comes to confidence. Confidence is equated to competence in the eyes of many. And so I learned that in business. So I showed up confidently. Yet underneath, it was like, the duck pedaling, and so I didn't feel it. And again, I saw it show up in my personal relationships as well. And it really probably wasn't until I made some tough decisions as I gained confidence. Even so, I left my marriage to my ex who passed away. My ex found out cancer was back shortly after we separated. I felt horrible. And then my ex passed away a couple of years, after that. But that was a bold move to do what I thought I needed to do because I loved myself and I wanted more, so that was a bold move. And I made that at 32 or 33, I can remember. And I'm almost 50 now. And so there are things like that. I'm very clear around, the kind of love I want, I deserve, and the relationships I'm in as a result. But I surrounded myself at some point with people who gave me lots of adoration and things, but weren't really healthy for me. And so it took some time. It took a lot of self-reflection and conversation to be able to do that, both personally and professionally.
How do you determine if the person in front of you is giving you adoration or truth? How do you know, hey, is this real feedback? Is it not? And how do you decide on that?
I approach people from a place, I give trust until I have reason not to. And so I tend to genuinely come at it from that perspective. That said, sometimes people are a little too blowing smoke up. And I'm like, really? Could I have done something better? So I'll challenge it. But I do try and approach it from a place of generosity and trust until it's proven otherwise. But I'm an avid observer, people in the current context and beyond to sort of then make an assessment over what are their real intentions? Are you looking for something for me? Or what is it?
No, that makes sense. You talked earlier about no excuses. How do you bring that in a way that's not going back to Iron Maiden, right? Like, I don't want to hear your excuses. Get it done versus no excuses in a way that it sounds more like you are today.
Hmm. Uh, it's a balance of the no excuses like mentality or philosophy with some empathy. So, like, let's understand how you got here and let people sit with them with the emotion that comes with it for a period of time. And then we need to move forward. What, like, you have a choice in terms of how you are going to respond to whatever the situation is. And ideally, there's a learning from it as well, if it's something you have control over to prevent it from happening again in the future. Those are conscious choices that you make. And so, to the point, like, I had a choice as a child. I could have wallowed in sadness. I could have chosen a very, very different path than I did. And sometimes things are outside of your control, but again, you choose how you're going to react or respond to it and what actions you're going to take. But again, it's a balance of empathy and giving that people that time and space, but we need to be planful. I use strategic intentionality all the time, strategic and intentional around how we go forward from here.
How often can people sit in that emotional space in the C-suite? Because that word doesn't seem to necessarily fit together with what happens most often.
Yeah, it's a really, really, I mean, it's a tough spot to be in. I mean, and I'll tell leaders and for myself, like, there's a balance in a one-on-one conversation with someone versus how do we show up for large, teams, divisions, or if you're a CEO, like the company as a whole, like, you need to be positive. You need to, give confidence in terms of the path that we have ahead of us, even if we didn't hit our quarterly numbers. But there's a level of transparency in terms of how you communicate. So I think there's a balance, and you need to strike that right balance at the appropriate time, setting, audience for how much you want to be emotional. Like, I never ever would have cried at work, like in my 20s. And now, probably a couple months ago, I was talking to my team and I said, I want to tell you, like, how proud I am of the work you've done and how much joy it brings me to, like, work with you. And even almost as I tell you that, brings tears to my, that kind of thing gets me emotional. I'm okay with that now. I'm okay with showing that. I would bottle that up. We are not doing that. That was the Victoria of the past versus the Victoria future. But, like, I think that's appropriate. And I want them to see this is authentic and how I genuinely feel in me communicating this message to you.
How do people usually respond?
I think it depends on how they've experienced leadership in the past. There's some who just embrace it, and others are like, "Oh my God, she's crying! Like, what do you give her a hug? Like, what do I?" So it varies, I think, based on people's, like, personal and professional experience, their own personality and styles. But for the most part, Rocky, I'll say, like, people receive it quite warmly because I hate authenticity is an abused phrase and when people say that, but in this case, like, it is authentically me, and I think they know it comes from the heart.
And that's a big part of it. You also talk about whole human leadership. Is that some of the things we've been talking about? Is that something totally different? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, whole human leadership. It's a way of leading that combines a multitude of different, pieces from the authenticity, but it's recognizing not only are we as leaders a whole human, meaning we come with a whole host of experience, lived, personal, work, maybe location, maybe you're coming to a new, to a new country and, working with that, but also the people we lead are whole humans. You don't get to check all of your experience. If you had we're recording this on a Monday, we don't get to check if we had a bad weekend, and we have to still show up. And so it's the recognition of that, creating the safe space, a sense of belonging. It's about transparency in the way we communicate that builds trust. It's a lot of the things that, when I entered the workforce, command and control, there was none of that. Thou shalt do as I say, and based upon hierarchy, we did that. And so whole human leadership is, being much, much different than, again, the leadership of past.
How pervasive do you think that shift has occurred in corporate culture?
Not as much as it should, but I think there was a groundswell of movement sort of post-COVID, the things that grabbed headlines, right? The Great Resignation, quiet quitting, that was the workforce saying, we want something demonstrably different from where we were. We want there was a significant lack of trust for people like to work from their homes. Yet for the most part, they were proven to be more productive in those environments. And then you had the looking at how often your light on Teams goes. Are you available to like those kinds of things? So I think the workforce has driven more the leadership to be different. That said, I don't think enough businesses have learned how to balance, that strong business and financial results with building the right kind of engagement and culture for their teams.
This episode of Richer Soul is sponsored by the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you're a business owner who wants to scale and grow, increase profits, or want to have strategic conversations around your financials, then check out the podcast. You'll learn how to work less, increase cash flow, increase profits, and build reserves to help you weather storms. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. You have to hire people who believe in your culture and vision. You can't train that. Have you found companies hire to that, or are they just trying to train, or do they just assume everyone's going to read the wall and learn it? Or
I think so. I spent a lot of years actually doing like in human capital strategy and service, and so working with a lot of the HR leaders in support of the business mission. And lots of times we get we spend 2 days in an offsite working towards redefining vision, mission, values, what culture we say we want, but then, putting together fancy handbooks for it. And then, come back later and they wonder why their engagement results like aren't aligned to that. And I said, because those are aspirational. It's great to have put the words down on paper, on your company SharePoint, on the wall, on your onboarding decks. But if you are not living that, if you're not building belief in creating the systems, beneath that to believe in that, to drive action towards that, then it is just words on a page.
It reminds me, these days, everyone wants to give you a survey.
Yeah.
What I find and what drives me up the wall on the surveys is the survey is always about the person I just spoke with. And I understand you need to see the customer experience. They never ask me about the leadership of the company and how the company got me to this phone call. And more often than not, I'm on the phone, not because there's a basic issue or because whatever with the person I'm speaking with. Usually I'm on the phone because there is a system breakdown in how the company delivers its products and services, and it is a top leadership problem. And I'll give you, like right now in the news is Southwest Airlines. They're going to say, how was your flight? They're not going to say, how is our policy changes from the leadership about how we now run our airline, are they? No. And it seems more often than not that people don't listen maybe at different levels. I'm not going to say it's just at the top. It's probably everywhere. People don't listen.
I agree. And, to an earlier point, we were talking about like why people don't want to hear something that's contrary, to their own belief or the actions they're taking. I've worked in companies and for leaders or coached others who surround themselves with yes people, right? No one who will challenge them openly. And same thing from like surveys, so many times I'll say, well, you need an independent third party to do some 360 evaluations. Most employees don't believe that the employee surveys are really anonymous. And so they don't answer them honestly. They kind of tell them what they want to hear, or maybe it's a little bit of truth telling, but not enough.
So I have two questions on that. One, do they naturally surround themselves with yes people, or do people who tend to be around leadership just behave as yes people. Like chicken egg story here, right? Like which came first in trying to understand that? And then I want to talk about the survey.
I think it's both. I work for a CEO who she only wanted to surround herself with people who basically agreed with her.
Mm.
And that was very much in her style. And she made choices, leadership choices, because she came in as the new CEO to have those people in seat. But I do see that people are afraid. They operate out of fear. To the friend who told me, do you want to be rich or do you want to be right? They choose the rich path. And they're afraid that if they speak up to what they believe is right or an alternative, will jeopardize things for them. And a combination of both of those in saying, I think there's this third piece where there might be a leader who says that they want it, and they might actually be okay to hear it, but they're not in an environment that creates safety to speak up.
And I think that's a big part of it, is there safety? And when you give that feedback, is it listened to and heard? Or is it glossed over? Or are you punished for what you said? And how does that all kind of come to be? What I found when I was in corporate, they did a lot of surveys. And what we found was leadership, when they got a bad survey, would blame the frontline managers for not doing their job and whip them. And we got the very good attitude that it's better to be out of management than to be stuck in low-level management, because that was really where you had to work the hardest, got beat the hardest, and you had to deal with crap coming up and crap going down.
Oh, yeah.
It was brutal.
I think one of the worst jobs, the most challenging jobs to have is that first level of leadership, and the one right above. It's hard. Exactly to your point, Rocky. I mean, you're wanting to influence, but you're not senior enough to do it, and having the conversations, yet you got a lot of work. You maybe particularly that first line level leadership. Like I think of when I made the hop, right? It's, all of a sudden I've got like 15 to 20 direct reports, and it's like, it was crazy. And so I will often tell people, like, you need to be like, do some critical assessment over whether this is what you want, or like leadership is not for everyone. But again, to my definition of success, it was moving up a hierarchy, which meant leading more and more people at more senior levels. So like, let's flip that a little bit and let's have some conversation around what you're good at, like, and what you want to do versus what you can get paid to do. The whole ikigai, if you're familiar with like the Japanese ikigai, like, and I've had to tell people sometimes, like, sure, it'll pay you more money, but I don't think that your personality, like, this is not going to be a fit for you. So like, let's think about that.
And that's a very big part of it. How are you seeing these types of things roll out with Gen Z? Because it seems like they're the ones who are less tolerant of the past, but yet I hear the other side of the complaint of, hello, you have to work. And so what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because you've got that generation who's used to getting participation awards, right? So that versus like, getting the medal for, coming in first, second, or third. It's like, no, we're all going to get ribbons. And so they've come in and they're expecting, well, like, you're almost this conversation over bonuses. Well, like, give me a bonus and I'm going to I'll show you what I can do, versus saying, no, like, let's work and earn. And as a result of that, I will compensate you and reward you with bonuses. And so I think some of that is a generational, and I'll speak more for North America. I know it's different in very different cultures as well. So again, it's just a generalization, but that dynamic coupled with the expectation that I'm going to have a very different leader. I want you to be more human. I want you to trust me. And so they're at odds with one another. And so this is where, for leadership in the workplace who's got multi-generations you're managing, it's a real challenge because you need to approach them in very different ways to achieve similar outcomes.
It is. And it's funny because I think people don't realize every generation is a shift. And I was told you don't job hop. And, nowadays, none of that matters, but the rules keep changing. And so they do bring about things that are better. One of the biggest shifts that we're seeing right now in the workplace is AI. How are you seeing it affect the workplace management, and also just how it's all kind of shifting right now?
Oh, I'm spending so much time in this conversation for a host of reasons. One, I work for a large global technology company, and I support all the things that are almost the non-technical, including what is the workforce transformation going to look like? How are we going to ensure change and adoption? So I'm having a significant number of conversations around this. I'm seeing, however, some disappointing things. I think a lot of companies are making a blanket statement for their reduction in force, their layoffs as a result of AI. And I can tell you, Rocky, most clients we're working with do not have a wholesale strategy for it yet, let alone having it been implemented for that to be the reason why they're doing that level of layoffs. So it's an excuse, and it's creating significant concern and fear for those in the workplace when we could be shifting to a very different conversation.
So let me get this straight, because I know this is how companies behave. There becomes a global excuse, and everyone uses the global excuse to really right size their workforce. Has nothing to do with the other. So are you saying that AI is not the cause of the layoffs? Maybe they're bloated, maybe this, maybe that, or is it some of it? I use AI a lot, and as I hear these companies talk about how they're using AI, I'm like, yeah, no, you're not doing that, at least not to the level you think you are.
I think a lot of what we're hearing in the headlines right now with the large percentages, it's addressing a bloat in the workforce that came in large part through and post COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how they're claiming to be addressing it. That said, there is real reduction in labor that is here and coming significantly because of AI. 100%. I'm spending time. I do this interesting view. Many companies are working on. They're developing the use cases. I'm going to say that's sort of the top-down approach. Hey, in banking, for example, like the know your customer process before you let them open accounts or give them business lines or credit. You want to know who they are. You want to make sure they're not doing money laundering, that kind of thing. Like that's a process that's right to be using AI, given all the different data sources they would get. That's real. That's a top-down use case. But then for companies who are dealing with macroeconomics, who need to approach it from a business productivity perspective, I actually, and my team works with them bottoms up. Let's take a look at the roles you have in the organization. And based upon job titles, we need to make some assumptions around job architecture and things. These are the tasks that get performed. AI, if you want to have what's the greatest velocity to achieve productivity, let's look at the tasks. Those should be automated. And then what gets left behind, we might actually have to create some new different role definitions. So working in this way, that is real. And then, but trying to think about how long before you bring that into production before it is large scale is 6 to 18 to 24 months, depending on what you're talking about. So you need to be architecting the workforce for that. We need to have open conversations about that now. We need to figure out how do you create a combined group of different roles based upon combined or adjacent skills. And then what's the bridge for where people are today to future? So it's real. The percentage is not real, Rocky, in terms of what many companies are saying, hey, 5, 10, 15% of our workforce is out right now because we've brought AI. And I'm not seeing many that are that far advanced to be able to attribute that kind of reduction solely due to AI.
And I can see that. I think it is very helpful for a person to be able to improve their productivity. What I haven't seen is system-wide improvement due to that. And the other problem is the longer I'm working with AI, the more I'm seeing, we already know it hallucinates, but the more I'm also seeing things getting veered off. But then I'm also wondering, because a lot of these companies are not hiring entry level. I'm like, okay, if you don't hire your entry level today, who are your people going to be tomorrow? But more importantly, 5 or 7 years from now, who is going to understand the actual process or the system behind the AI so that they make sure that you're actually going the direction and doing the things in a way that should be done, not, mindlessly accepting it?
Yeah, there's a significant amount of work. I know that I transparently sometimes go head to head with our head of AI, who you can whiteboard. We have this phenomenal framework around how to build AI agents using policy, and policy writes the code, so that we don't have, as you're talking about, hallucinations. But we know that there's so much institutional knowledge that sits in humans that isn't all translated and documented into policy and processes, and may or may not be aligned to, particularly in regulatory environments. And so, I battle with him, for example, and say, no, you need to optimize the processes. One, you also need to be really focused on human-centered design so that the user experience is adopted such that we will see the kind of productivity gains that you want. So it's changing quickly. I mean, you look at, where even ChatGPT was 18 months ago versus now. So it's evolving so quickly and it's getting better and better and better. But you still need to not just train it, but there's the guardrails you put, optimizing processes aligned to policies and processes, but also the tacit knowledge that sits with the humans who do the work today that's not documented anywhere.
No, and the why. And it's more so even Claude now goes into Microsoft Excel. It'll bill you Excel sheets and it'll do all this stuff. What I am finding is mistakes, even just basic stuff. But if I didn't know how to question it, I wouldn't know it. Like I can see it and go, oh, there's an error here because I understand how it gets to that. If I didn't understand, I would just not know to even challenge it. And I think that's where I'm wondering. The second part is more economically. If we replace all the workers, who's going to buy your stuff? And nobody has answered that. You look at people won't even attempt an answer on that one.
Yeah, I think in some cases they don't know, but at the same time, there's mindfulness around. Again, I said earlier, as we talked about leaders, people do business with people, right? So there's roles that are going to exist and we're going to need them. But I think it's underestimated is the human skills that are going to be required and amplified. I love World Economic Forum does a study generally each year or every couple of years that looks at skills of the future. And so the one that they did last year says, here's what's going to be required for 2030. And of course, the usual suspects, as you'd see, around data, which is required for AI, around AI skills, right? So all that complex technology skills are there. But innovation, problem solving, empathy. I go back to my call center roots. That was one of the first places that AI, or even just automation at the time, came, and then started with AI. Think about the chat agents that you use when trying to get a hold of your bank or your telephone company. So by the time you're talking to an agent, it's so complex it doesn't fit the process flow, or you're dealing with a very irate customer. And so you need someone who can problem solve. You can need someone who shows up with empathy and compassion for the person. That's also being underestimated. So that's where who's buying it and or who's selling it, things shift in that, but they're still very much going to be required. But this is where I think we need to be really planful around how we're building roles for the future. And I think really importantly, hiring people into organizations that have a propensity to learn and be agile, because things are going to change so quickly.
And this is not what's being taught. So what this really comes back to is critical thinking and how to learn how to learn. So kids aren't taught how to learn. They're taught what to learn. They're not taught critical thinking. They're taught what's the answer for the test. And so the skills to work with AI are not actually being created well to have that type of back and forth, to challenge, to have a Socratic conversation. And again, coming back to the simple thing of what you talked about at the beginning, we surround ourselves with yes people instead of challenging. If we're not challenging the AI, if we're not looking at all these things, we end up in somewhat of a mess of a situation. And that's why I don't see how companies are going to survive if they don't build these pipelines and they don't teach their people how to do this. And we see it already in many industries where the apprentice process, even in white collar, doesn't exist. And so I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see. This might just be the hype. Like everyone said, brick and mortar stores were going to disappear in 1999. Here we are with brick and mortar stores. Is online shopping around? Absolutely. But we still need these types of things. So I don't know. Maybe you're seeing something different, but it sounds like right now it's more of an excuse than a reality. And we're creating more fear than maybe we need to.
I think there's more fear than there should be. That said, we should, and I won't even say, I don't think we should all fear, because I don't think we should. I think we should be aware that it's going to impact almost every role. Some exceptions, right? When you need an electrician or a plumber, right? Like, so there's something where there's less of an impact to. But I don't want people to fear it. I want them to recognize most roles will change and instead think about, what does this mean for me? How do I keep my skills and myself relevant for future based upon what's going to be required? And come at it with just a very different, mindset, the sort of the growth mindset and just openness to change.
And you had also mentioned the other thing, which is the constant desire to learn and to grow. And I don't know how that's being nurtured. I don't see it as being something that, we're taught in school that learning's not fun.
Yeah.
And so these are things that have to shift. Hopefully they will. And hopefully you can get that point across to our leaders and see where they go from there.
Yeah.
Anything that you would have liked to share but didn't get a chance to?
I touched on one thing, and I would just go a little bit deeper about stepping into your zone of discomfort. So my favorite quote, I have it on the wall, is from George Adair that says, "Everything you've ever wanted lives on the other side of fear." I'm a big believer. So as we just talk about fear of the unknown, fear of AI, I just think when you're in a place that makes you uncomfortable, that zone of discomfort, like that's actually where the magic happens. Growth and opportunity, I think, comes when you step into that place. So I'd encourage your listeners to, step into their own zone of discomfort. Like it's truly brought some magical things and, to my life.
I would guess that if you looked at the way you think today compared to where you were, 20 years ago, it's probably night and day. And you're like, how could I have even thought that way?
Oh, yes. The benefit of maturing and experience, as I tell my kids, who you may or may not want to hear that from me.
Well, we're going to find out what you're going to tell your kids in a second. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's one truth about success you wish more people understood?
That they should define what success looks like for them and not listen to external forces.
I think that happens a lot. Everyone's keeping up with the Joneses' life, not theirs. And so they define success by somebody else's standard. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I talked about it here, but the greatest lesson for me was just that, being vulnerable and being me was actually way more powerful than any mask I hid behind.
It's a hard lesson to step into, right? In the sense that, it's easy to say that, but it's hard to just be vulnerable and put yourself out there.
It is.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Oh, wow. My kids are almost 26 and almost 22. So I have given them advice. In particular, I remember my younger one who asked me, like, "Mom, what should I do, like, career?" And I said, "You need to, do what you love and money will follow." Of course, then he asked me, "Well, which one pays more between the two that he was debating between?" I'm like, I could tell you one of those typically pays more, but that's not the advice I'm giving you.
Yeah, that's one of those things that you have to find the harmony in. And I think it's a difficult thing. I mean, there are just some careers that don't pay. And I tell people those might be better as hobbies or figure out how to do that in a way inside of it. In other words, somebody wants to to help people sociology wise, you can go do that as the CEO of a company, right? You can create that culture in your business to really help people. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. If people would like to learn more about you and your services and so forth, how do they find you?
The easiest place is to go to my website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. I'm sure you'll have that in your show notes, so they don't need to figure out the spelling of that last name. And from there, they can click to follow or connect with me on the other social platforms as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
This conversation reminded me of something I think about often. We spend so much energy protecting ourselves from being seen that we forget being seen is exactly what leadership requires. It's also how to be authentic in the age of AI. Victoria said something I want to leave with you. Being vulnerable and being herself was far more powerful than any mask she hid behind. So here's a question worth sitting with tonight. If the armor that made you successful is the same thing holding you back, what would it look like to finally take it off? If someone needs to hear that question, send them the episode. Sometimes the right conversation at the right time changes everything. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.